Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why must my heart feel lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Let not your heart be troubled. His tender words I hear, and resting on His goodness, I lose my doubts and fears. Though by the path He leadeth, but one step I may see. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know, yes I know, He watches me. If you're up against lions and you can't climb that mountain, you're in front of the lion and can't see your way through. You gotta lift up your eyes and look to the Lord. You gotta trust in Jesus, and this is what He said. He said, be not afraid, be strong and have courage, and be not dismayed, for I have sent thee. He said, have faith in me. In this world of darkness, don't believe what you see, for I am with thee. When you're stuck in a valley, the valley of of a shadow of death. You've gotta lift up your eyes and look to the Lord. You've gotta trust in Jesus, and this is what he said. He said, be not afraid, be strong and have courage, and be not dismayed, for I have sent thee. He said, have faith in me, in this world of darkness. Don't believe what you see, for I am with thee. Don't believe what you see, for I am with thee.
Well, good evening, everybody. I want to welcome everybody that's here in the chapel and those that are out there online. This is the Children of the Free Church Ministry. My name is Charles Garcia, otherwise known as Buddy Garcia. I'm the teaching pastor or pastoring teacher. We gather here live every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time for teaching on God's Word. Archives are available on our same site as well as on YouTube and probably other sites as well. One of these days you'll turn on your coffee maker and we can maybe come out your coffee maker and talk at you. Now, I don't know, because of some problems that came up last week, if there was any of you that did not know. I know that I made the announcement after the cutoff that I had surgery early this week on Monday. So it's been less than a week. I go back in tomorrow for recheck. There's been some rough spots and rough areas, but God's with us. We're going to make it through this. And because it always comes into the picture, he always comes into the picture, we'll just take a moment to say to the devil, I'm still here, USOB. Now, some of the problems that we had last week were over trying to be nice and give you guys a picture to look at. I don't know that I'm going to call for one this week, but I do need to have a plan. If for some reason we call on that Brandon and things freeze up, what should we do? Have somebody call us up? Those of you, there's a handful of you that have direct numbers. If it freezes, you call us up and let us know what's going on if I call for that. And that happens. And we have a lot of teaching to go through tonight. My eyes are a little bit blurry and recovering from the surgery. They didn't surgery my eyes, but in the recovery process it affects your whole body, and my vision's a little bit blurry, so I may need to look a little closer at my notes because there's a lot of information here and I want to make sure that you get all of it. I made a command decision not to repeat last week's message. Those of you who either got the 33 minutes, you got the bulk of it, and as we teach on the pyramid, we'll be covering things over and over again to get the gestalt in there, just like we did with the lost tribes. So you didn't miss anything. If you missed it, you didn't miss it, because it's going to come back at you probably tonight. I want to correct a couple of things as we start off. Number one is I keep saying, and for some reason I can't stop myself from saying it, that the blocks on that pyramid weigh 60 or 70 to 90 tons. They weigh 2.5 tons. Some blocks are as big as 70 to 90 tons. What, 2.3 million of them in the makeup of this building. Now, to recap, some of the dates from the last message, which is important for you to know, is that last time we showed you and came to what's called the benchmark. And that's the date at which everything starts, and you go up or down from there, measuring the passageways and get your timeline going. And the benchmark comes once in the pyramid was founded on comes once in every 26,000 years. And as you know, at that time, the descending passage reflects light thrown by Thuban, the star called Subtle that's in Alpha Draconis out there all the way down to the bottom of the pit. That's part of what we taught last week. And we also taught that when you get the bench line and you shoot it beam straight out into the heavens, I don't know if I taught this or not, it hits the Pleiades. The Pleiades are described as having a sweet influence on us, and they are protected by Taurus the bull behind his shoulder up in the heavens. When we were teaching about that, we covered that. Anyway, the pyramid points right at that from the benchmark date. We also covered that the date of the flood is in the pyramid, and that's counted as 2341 BC. And when you shoot off the side of the pyramid where that date comes from, it goes right straight to Aquarius, which is water, and the symbol is usually the outpouring of water, and that's representative of the flood, the great deluge that came on the earth, the flood. Exodus is in the pyramid. We talked about that, the date of the Exodus when they came out of Egypt and when Moses was given the law was in 1453 BC. It also represented at that time a miraculous turnaround with the ability to go back towards God, because before it had been down the descending passageway, and I got to be careful saying down, down, down the descending passageway because I think we crashed the last time. The birth of Christ is in the pyramid, 2 BC, not 0 BC. 2 BC because of an error that was made by Dionysius the historian when he counted, or he did not count, Octavian as being a emperor twice, which he was an emperor twice, once under his own name, once under an assumed name, and it causes an error that winds up being 2 years, therefore built into the pyramid already. I don't know how they knew this thousands of years before it happened, but that 2-year error is in there. 2 BC, the birth of Christ, is a step up. And 33.5 inches later, representing the lifespan of Christ, there's a bursting forth from the floor upward into the grand gallery from the ascending passage, which at that point is only about 4 feet tall. I think a little bit narrower or wide than 4 feet. And then all of a sudden it opens up and you can just stand up free walking towards God, up towards God. And that represents his death and crucifixion and him paying the price of taking God's wrath on himself to buy us freedom from sins past, present, and future. And it's represented in stone, permanent, with a bursting forth at that point of the pyramid, sitting upright, free from the law because of the good news of the gospel, able to go towards God. Now, built into the pyramid, there is something that's called a displacement factor. And it's built into the pyramid so that's why the entrance of the pyramid is not in the center where Al-Mamun dug, but it's 286.1 pyramid inches to the left. That's the displacement factor, 286.1. Now, as it turns out, the pyramid has been built in such a way that, it doesn't have a top on it. That's because the top can't fit on there. There's a displacement factor that makes it 286.1 inches too small for the cap to fit on it. Again, the displacement factor showing God or man being off from God, and also a contraction at the top of the pyramid, which makes it time for us to go back over directions that and movements that have meaning and symbolism to God spiritually. For example, I just named one. Contraction is away from God. Expansion is towards God. Left is away from God. And what's the Latin word for left? Sinister. Isn't that interesting? Sinister. Anyway, left is away from God. Right is towards God. And this is throughout Scripture and throughout life. But it's extremely crucial in the reading of the symbols in the pyramid because it's silent. There's no writing or pictures in there. You're just looking at numbers and directions and movements in or out. So again, left is away from God, right's toward God. Up movement is towards God. Down movement is away from God. In movement is towards God. Out is away from God. I already said it, time to repeat it. Contraction is away from God. Expansion is towards God. North is towards God. South is away from God. West is toward God. And east is away from God. This is God talking to us. Listen to what I'm saying. That's God talking to us in numbers and directions. Isn't it odd that the displacement factor is completely corrected in 33 AD when Christ is crucified, because the gallery, what's called the Grand Gallery, goes up 286.1 inches. Now if you break down the number 286, 2 means the adequate witness. 8 means new beginnings. 6 is the number of a man. And if you add them all up, it comes out to 7, which is completion. So the pyramid was corrected the same distance it was off when Christ bursts forward. Now we taught last week, we're going to go over some more things that we taught last week. I think it was last week or the week before. Something that I call the Christ triangle. Excuse me. It's actually called the Christ angle. And when I tell you the details of it, I'm going to tell you tonight. I didn't tell you last time I told you. You put it on the face of the pyramid, it points to Bethlehem. But listen, there's a big step in 2 BC. Okay? It represents the birth of Christ. Now that's not to be confused with the giant step which comes in 1840, which is the expansion of knowledge in the world. This is a big step in 2 BC when Christ is born. 33.5 inches further up, the Grand Gallery begins, and it begins with a bursting up through the floor, representative of Christ bursting through and setting us free. If you take this date of the crucifixion and the date of his birth, and you draw a line from his birth to the date of the crucifixion, it forms a triangle. Okay? Now keep in mind what's going on. The birth of Christ, death of Christ. If you put lines in there, it forms a triangle. You take that triangle representing those dates of Christ, and you put that on the face of the pyramid, and it points right directly at the river Jordan, where Joshua crossed, the Red Sea, where the Israelites crossed, and straight to Bethlehem, where Christ was born. Another thing that's really startling about this is that if you take the distance in what they call furlongs, and you measure the distance in furlongs from the pyramid to Bethlehem, where Christ was born, it comes out to 2,139. And if you add in that 2-year mistake that Dionysius made, what does that come to? 2141, the benchmark. Pointing right at Bethlehem is pointing to the benchmark for the birth of Christ. You extend these lines of the Christ triangle a little further in all directions, and it forms another smaller triangle. This is called Paul's triangle. And if you do the measurements and directions, it represents Paul's ministry, who of himself said he was one called out of due season. And the reality was he was called out of due season to save the gospel of grace from those that were turning it back towards Judaism and bondage to the law. He's in the pyramid. On the upper end of the grand gallery, there is what's called the Great Step. I think I called it grand a while ago, the Great Step. And that, if you take the measurements an inch to a year, is the date 1840. And at that time, that was when there happened to be, and I taught this when I was teaching the Lost Tribes, a great expansion of knowledge, particularly about the Great Pyramid, but also about man and humankind that took place in those years with those researchers, those scientists, those experts. These ascending passageways, by the way, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead are named. And when you're going up the ascending passage, when it's 4 feet high, it's called the Hall of Truth and Darkness. That was when you were able to go back towards God, but it was very difficult under the burden of the law. You had to go stooped over, slipping back. And if you remember earlier on, this passageway was blocked 3 times with granite plugs, also saying you can't go this way. Now, that was called the Hall of Truth and Darkness in the Egyptian. This is not their religion, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. After it opens up into the Grand Gallery and you're free to walk up, it's called the Hall of Truth and Light. And it was thought, the Egyptians thought, that this represented some kind of messianic happening in Egypt. Indeed, the light and the gospel of Christ setting us free. That's what I'm telling you, the reality of it. But the Egyptians even were saying something big's happening here, something messianic. Now, it's important to point out, really important, that in a land, Egypt, that's dominated by the worship of animals, underline that, all tombs and temples are covered with hieroglyphics and contain statues and idols. The Great Pyramid is completely silent in that regard, mute. None of the above. It's, if you will, a time capsule. Time capsule and a witness of God, a witness to God saying, I told you so. Now, the historian Josephus said that when the priestly line, remember the priestly line started from Shem on through the descendants, the priestly line from Shem on was warned of an impending disaster. Now, we now know it to be the flood, but it wasn't saying a flood's coming. They were warned of an impending disaster. And they built two monuments. They built one of brick in Mesopotamia, which is no longer there, and they built one of stone in Egypt. Still there to this day. And by the way, while we're on the subject of floods, the wear on the Sphinx is not from wind and sand, but from water. We're going to go over some more facts about the pyramid. The casing stones, by the way, I need to correct myself. I keep having a tendency to say they were taken off in the 6th century. No, they were taken off 600 years ago, which puts us where, like the 1400s. They was taken off about 600 years ago to build mosques and office buildings in Cairo. See, Satan's attack on God's monument of the Tura limestone blocks, 144,000 of them covering this pyramid. I told you before, they're white, perfectly made. Cause reflections could be seen from outer space. You could see it many miles away. Another one I didn't tell you about. During the winter and the summer solstice, the pyramid with the tourist limestone lining on it cast the shadow of a giant, or a reflection of a giant cross on the Nile Delta. Now, we have a tendency to believe it's only Old Testament things that are in there, but come on. It would cast a reflection of a giant cross across the Nile Delta. And we also covered that it covers a quadrant where you take one side of the curvature from one end of the Nile Delta to the other side, and you bring them down to a point, and it comes to the Great Pyramid. So I'm just mentioning that again in passing. Let's go underneath the pyramid, down to the bedrock. The bedrock is over a flat-topped granite mountain, leveled. Understand what I just said? I'm not saying level, I said leveled on top for the pyramid. 13 acres. And on 13 acres doesn't vary more than half an inch. And I told you that before, I'll tell you again. The limestone blocks laid with optical precision, there's no more than a 1/50th of an inch deviation and 35 square feet between these blocks where you can't stick a business card through. On the bedrock underneath the pyramid, over 13 acres, it doesn't vary more than half an inch. That's how precise it is. Who built it? The Egyptian Book of the Dead calls it the Pillar of Enoch. Got to be a reason for that. He's in there somewhere. Again and again in the Great Pyramid, again and again, the number 365 is memorialized in the pyramid. That's the number of years that Enoch lived on the earth before God took him. Now, we're not going to go there, but I'm going to give you some references. In Genesis 5:21, it says that he lived 365 years and God took him. It didn't die. God just took him. In Jude 1, another place where it refers to Enoch, it says, Enoch prophesied he'd come with 10,000s, I think it says, of his saints. In Hebrews 11, it says that Enoch walked and talked with God, and then God took him across. Now, get ready for some more amazement here. If you get the base of the pyramid, all four sides, it's not flat. It's concave, and it's faceted. And in those facets, if you take the measurements from one side to the other, it has all three measurements of the 3 years. The solar year, 365.242 years. The sidereal year, 365.256 years. So they're real close. And what's called the anomalistic year, which is 365.259 years. As you go up the courses of the pyramid, those facets form, I don't know what's being said, form little pyramids, little triangles. So at the base of each base, there's another pyramid formed by those angles. I hear what's being said, but I don't understand what's being said. Okay, sorry folks. They form little triangles. Enoch, you'll find this in the book of Enoch, which is one of the apocryphal books. He lived 365 years, 88 days, and 9 hours, or 365.242, and God took him. Now there's much, much more to teach on the passages. I don't know what we're going to be doing in the weeks ahead or in what order we're going to be doing things. But we haven't even gotten into the Queen's chamber or the King's chamber or even into the pit under the pyramid. In the King's chamber, the floor changes to granite. And where it changes to granite, the ratio of pyramid inch in time changes from an inch to a year to an inch to a month. So that very high detail is laid out once you get into the King's chamber. The entire history of the Jewish people is in the horizontal passage that goes to the Queen's chamber. I think you can probably guess what's in the pit. New evidence, geological studies indicate that the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid may be 10,000 years older than thought. This is by the so-called scholars, even though some scholars are still looking for a secret burial chamber. They're not going to find it. Now, did we already sing the song? No. We're going to sing it? Yeah, okay. We're going to be singing the song when we're done here. And I'm going to highlight some of what's going on by taking you to 4 places in the Bible rather quickly. We're going to go into the Old Testament, into the book of Psalms, to Psalms 118. Remember I told you about the displacement factor. other than Isaiah 19, where we teach that it talks about the witness of God in the land of Egypt in the end days. It seems like there isn't anywhere else that it says anything about the pyramid. Well, if you're well taught and you know, not so. Psalm 118. If you go to verse 22, it says, the stone which the builders refused. Remember the displacement factor? Is become the headstone of the corner. So that's what Christ is. That's what Christ is going to be. That's what's going to happen in the end times. It's going to be restored, correcting the displacement error. The stone which the builders refused, by their building, they built it so it came out so it wouldn't fit, has become the headstone of the corner. Now, there's only one building throughout the world that has a chief cornerstone or a head cornerstone, and that's a pyramid, because it touches all four sides. Go with me to Isaiah 28:16. Isaiah 28, give me a show of hands when you get there. Verse 16, therefore thus saith the Lord God, behold, I lay in Zion for a foundation a stone, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. That all sounds nice and wonderful, but when you start thinking about the pyramid and its headstone, doesn't it have a lot more meaning?
Yes, sir.
I lay in Zion for a foundation a stone, tried stone. He was. A precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Now, almost, but it's worth pointing out, almost that reference, Isaiah 28:16, almost is 286.1 if you look at the numbers, isn't it? It's 281.6.
Yeah.
Interesting. Go with me in the New Testament to Matthew 21. If you had not had this teaching on the pyramid, you would have no idea, and most people have not had it. Most people have no idea what they're talking about here. Matthew 21, verse 42, and we're going to be singing it tonight. It says, Jesus saith unto them, did you ever read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected? Now that's in red in my red letter Bible. I mean, Jesus himself is saying this. The stone which the builders rejected, that same stone is become the head of the corner. Only one kind of building has a head cornerstone or chief cornerstone, I just told you. Go with me to 1 Peter. It's a little tiny book in the New Testament. 1 Peter 2. And there's actually a couple of different references in this reference. Chapter 2, verse 4. To whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious. Now that ties into the other reference where it says it's a precious stone, right? It also says that men disallowed it when they did. But it's saying God chose it. Verse 6. Behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone. How many buildings have a chief cornerstone? One. Pyramid. I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone. Elect. Precious. And he that believeth on him shall not be confounded. Why are they calling a stone him? And there's then verse 7. Unto you therefore which believe he is precious, but unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner. Now, Jesus is the cornerstone. And he is witness to, in God's witness in stone, the great pyramid of God at Giza, put there thousands and thousands of years before the events. That's our God. I repeat, as I've said before, he be well able to take care of his trusting, faithing ones, and that's what he's looking for. Trusting, faithing ones, and that's my message tonight. For the offertory. It's offering time. After the offertory, I'll have a few closing words, and then we'll close out the service. Anybody that's new out there watching or listening, welcome aboard. Hang on to your hat. You need 7-league boots to follow us, and you need a 7-league hat to hold all the knowledge as well. Okay, go ahead, take it away.
Where can I go when the storms of life are raging? Who can I turn to when the winds of sorrow blow? Is there no refuge in a time of tribulation? I go to the rock, I know he's able. I go to the rock. I go to the rock of my salvation. I go to the stone that the builders rejected. I run to that mountain, and that mountain stands by me. When this world is sinking sand, on Jesus the rock I stand. When I need shelter, when I need a friend, I go to the rock. I go to the rock of my salvation. I go to the stone that the builders rejected. I run to that mountain, and that mountain stands by me. When this world is sinking sand, on Jesus the rock I stand. When I need shelter, when I need a friend, I go to the rock. I need shelter, when I need a friend, I go to the rock.
Now that song should have more meaning. A lot of people know it, they sing it, They don't realize, and they talk about the stone the builders rejected. They still don't know that they're talking about the Great Pyramid in Egypt. Now, it's been brought to my attention that I may have misspoken. I sometimes misspeak. And so, but my crowd's intelligent. If I say years when I mean months or days, you figure out what I'm talking about, okay? And I trust you in that regard. And sometimes I do misspeak. So, and those of you who are my sharpshooters out there, always feel free to point it out to me in a message, but just know that I trust in God, and He's making known to you what needs to be known to you. We're going to be continuing to teach on the pyramid. I'm not sure what aspects. We're probably going to start getting into some of the chambers now, King's Chamber particularly, maybe some things under the pyramid in the pit, as God leads. And God does lead. I'm just looking at an old note of mine in my old notes where it says there was some kind of a picture tour of the Great Pyramid that was on GizaPyramid.com. It was like, eight pages long, but I didn't want anybody moving ahead of the teaching, and I'm reluctant to give you those kind of references because even though I like you to see what we're talking about and learn about it, there's a lot of misinformation intentionally from Satan and others, and so take whatever you see or hear with a grain of salt. And when you watch ancient astronauts, you take what they say with a big grain of salt, because they keep saying things like the Great Pyramid, and they show pictures of the second pyramid, the Pyramid of Khephren, the one that still has some limestone, and they call it the Great Pyramid. Or they'll say the Great Pyramids. Yeah, there's a bunch of pyramids, but there's only one Great Pyramid. So you take what they say with a grain of salt, but watch it so you can actually see the physical things in real life of what's being talked about and what's being presented. Now, I think what I will do now, just before we close, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to ask Brandon to throw up the picture of the pyramid. Not throw up, but throw up the picture of the pyramid, because this picture has a good representation of the sheer mass of what we're talking about. If you look at that, it's almost solid stone with a couple of little teensy skinny passageways, one going down under the pyramid to the pit, and one going up, which branches off to the Queen's Chamber, goes up to the Grand Gallery, which I was telling you about, where the 286.1 displacement factor is corrected by Christ's death to the King's Chamber. But these were built into the structure. They didn't carve these after the structure was built. With all that scientific and factual knowledge that I've been teaching you and reading you in that. So if we're back live, let's go ahead and close it out.
Well, I searched and I searched for a road that led to glory. I wondered if I'd ever find my way. I was so dismayed, for the road it seemed so lonely. But then I heard a voice within me say, you've got to keep on walking, keep right on walking, walking in the light of the Lord. walking in the light of the Lord. You'll get to heaven someday. Can only get in the faith way. Walking in the light of the Lord. You've got to keep on walking. Keep right on walking. Walking in the light of the Lord. You'll get to heaven someday. Can only get in the faith way. Walking in the light of the Lord. Walking in the light of the Lord. Walking